Welcome to Chapter 6. This is called A Parting of Ways, and that refers to the split, first in terms of outlook and orientation, and later in the Middle Ages in terms of outright separation of the two entities, the split between the Western Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. At the beginning of the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church, that is the Roman Church, had taken over the Roman Empire, but the Roman Empire had fallen apart. And the church stood in for a civil government as one of the few things that tied together civilization in a way that transcended the small political groupings of people that arose in Europe with the dissolution of the Roman Empire. Pope Gregory the Great, in the late 500s, decreed that pictures in church were okay for decorating the church so long as they told a religious story in as simple as possible a way, so that the artistry didn't detract from the religiosity. That is, that the art didn't become an object of adoration in itself. Don't forget, Roman Catholic Christianity replaced paganism in the Roman Empire in the 300s. And pagans had idols that they worshiped, much like the Greeks worshiped the statue that was in the temple. Christianity brought in the concept of an invisible God, and some people thought that images had no place in church because the recently converted pagans would be confused. They would think these were actually God. Others felt, as did Pope Gregory the Great, that art in churches was all right, and it helped people who couldn't read to understand the biblical stories that they were told. This grew up into a controversy between people who wanted art in the churches and those who didn't, who were called iconoclasts. In the 700s and the 800s, this was a raging battle. This chapter introduces you to art in Western Europe and in Eastern Europe during the early part of the Middle Ages, around 600 and 700. We first look at what a church looks like, a big meeting hall, and we look at a piece of mosaic artwork where Jesus and his apostles are looking at you as they're acting out this scene of the dividing of the bread and the fishes to feed the multitudes. Bear in mind why the images are looking at you. It has to do with the fact that people were being reminded not only of that biblical story, but of the fact that God was watching you. And as you look at some of the other illustrations of the artworks that are created in other mediums to decorate churches, keep that in mind. You'll usually see that the people being pictured, Jesus, or in some cases God himself, may be looking directly at you with the idea that it reinforces that notion that you're being observed. In the latter part of this chapter, we take a look at Byzantine art, that is the art from the Eastern Orthodox area, and I've given you some supplementary readings to flesh out some ideas about Eastern European art. One of these small 10-minute topics deals with icons and their use in the Greek Orthodox Church. And another one of the readings deals with Hagia Sophia, a very grand church that was constructed and reconstructed many times in Constantinople. And in 1453, when the Muslims finally conquered Constantinople, it was turned into a mosque. It's now a museum. It's a very grand structure with a huge dome. I think it's worthy of your attention. It isn't mentioned in the story of art, but I've given you a short supplementary reading on that. Hope you enjoy this chapter.